Members, we move on to questions to the Minister of Finance, and we'll start with listed questions. Question 2 and 15 have been withdrawn. I call David Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 1.
With your permission, last Collier, I answer questions 1 and 12 together. The spending review is an opportunity to invest in public services and support a shared ambition for economic growth. Together with my devolved government counterparts, we discussed the upcoming spending review with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury at the Finance Interministerial Standing Committee on the 27th of February. I then wrote to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury on the 10th of April on a range of executive-specific issues to be considered in advance of the spending review, due to be announced on 11th of June. A joint letter from the devolved finance ministers to the CST also issued on the same day. This covered a number of common issues. Together with my counterparts in Wales and Scotland, I met with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury on the 24th of April to discuss this issue raised in our joint letter. Following this, a joint letter to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury issued on the 9th of May, pressing for the further Finance Interministerial Standing Committee meeting and bilateral meetings in advance of the spending review.
David Brooks for supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And today of all days, the Minister will be well aware of the needs and asks from around the Chamber and from departments. In recent weeks, I have engaged with local police, who it's clear are stretched, and we'll all be aware of the pressure our housing stock is under. But today, particularly in advance of ministerial visit, I've asked for next week to Dundonald High School. I wanted to ask him what he has been doing to impress upon Whitehall the crisis in our school estate, with maintenance backlogs numbering 450 million.
Sure.
The member will be aware that my predecessor commissioned Professor Jerry Haltham to carry out work in relation to identifying the true need of spend here in this region. That work has now been complete, and I can confirm to the House today that I have issued that report to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury and also copied the Secretary of State on it as well. That report looks at our devolved institutions and our spend in very detail. It looks at education and other areas as well to see what the difference in spend is required here and elsewhere. And I can assure the member that I have continued to press the Chief Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of State in relation to the need for this place to be fairly and properly funded to allow us to deliver education, policing, whatever it may be, and also to ensure that the services we deliver are in modern, up state-of-purpose buildings such as new schools.
Caroline Cullen, first of all.
Collier, as well as the issues that you've just outlined, Minister, can you give us an overview of what other executive-specific issues that you raised with the Chief Secretary to the British Treasury, please?
Sure.
There is an ever-growing list of issues that we're raising with the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, and I hope that the spending review resolves some of them. I expect it won't resolve others, and those discussions will have to continue. But as an example, as I've noted, funding at need, including potential cliff edge, agricultural support funds, access to Treasury reserves, housing executive borrowing, local growth and renewal funds, Internal Market Act, and specifically in relation to financial assistance powers, Casement Park, cost of doing business, tax-free childcare, inheritance tax, fraud and ERA benefit, employers' national insurance contributions, mother and baby homes, and transformation. As I say, some of these matters may be answered as part of the comprehensive spending review. How satisfactorily they're answered remains to be seen, but other matters I suspect I will have to continue to engage with the Treasury about.
Call Steve Aiken.
Apologies, as I slowly limp up. Minister, thank you very much indeed for your comments. The question I would have is, when you're dealing with the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, is there any indication that we're going to re-look at how debt is classified, and whether there's going to be changes in how we look at RRI and our ability to tap into that, particularly for things like infrastructure spending?
Sure.
There has been no direct comment from the Chief Secretary of Treasury. That I am aware that Rachel Reeves has made comment in this regard over a period of time, and it will be interesting to see if the comprehensive spending review is used to see how we classify debt, and will it help alleviate some of the pressures on departments in repay? Obviously, with any borrowing, you have to repay it. And will it open up opportunities for investment in infrastructure in the future? So I await to see what the comprehensive spending review says on this matter.
Call Jim Dolan.
Question number 3.
Minister.
I am keen to see the baby loss certificate scheme progress urgently to give bereaved families formal recognition of their loss. I want all parents and families who have suffered the devastating loss of a baby to feel that their grief is recognised. The Death, Stillbirths and Baby Loss Bill, which will provide a power to make regulations to form a scheme, is currently at committee stage. While I acknowledge the importance of due process for scrutiny, I would hope this stage could progress as quickly as possible. My officials and colleagues from the Department of Health are working closely together to progress arrangements to consult with the stakeholders on the detail of the scheme. I have already met with SANS on this and have further engagement in my calendar with other key stakeholders. I intend to launch a public consultation before the summer to ensure that everyone here can provide their views to help us shape this scheme so it meets the needs and expectations of those who have experienced the loss of a baby. Once the process is complete, my officials will draft the required secondary legislation and operationalise the scheme. If these matters progress smoothly, I anticipate that the scheme would be operational by the end of the year.
Dolan for supplementary question.
Thank you, Minister. Once the scheme is in operation, will there be a charge for a baby loss certificate?
Minister.
It is not my intention to charge for the baby loss certificate or place unnecessary barriers in the way of anyone who is seeking the certificate.
Jerry Carroll.
Minister, have your officials as part of this bill looked at that addressing the anomaly affecting some of my constituents who are same-sex couples, unmarried, living in the north, went through IVF treatment in the south? My understanding is as things stands, the non-birth mother won't be named on the birth certificate. There seems to be an equality and rights gap. Has your department looked at this yet?
Sure.
It's not an issue that immediately jumps to mind that has been raised with me by officials, and it's a matter which I will take under further consideration, and I've no doubt you'll raise it through the committee considerations as well. As I said to the previous questioner, we don't want to be placing barriers in the way of people here. We want to make sure that this is a compassionate scheme that encapsulates everyone and allows those who wish to obtain a certificate to do so.
Call Matthew O'Toole.
Question 4.
Minister.
It is for the Department of Infrastructure to determine NI Water's funding within the budget envelope agreed for the Department by the Executive. My intention is that the 25-26 will be the last single-year executive budget. The multi-year spending review being announced by the Chancellor in June will set resource budgets for 3 years and capital budgets for 4 years, with a commitment to hold a spending review every 2 years. This will provide a basis to build our longer-term trajectory for departmental spending. I will be making recommendations to the Executive on a multi-year budget to align with the spending review period. This will involve looking at the entirety of the public spending profile going forward and considering it in the context of the priorities for the programme for government. Multi-year budgets will not solve the issues facing the Executive, but they will allow a more strategic and long-term roadmap to be set out, helping departments and stakeholders to plan accordingly. The Executive's programme for government, along with the investment strategy, which I hope will be finalised soon, are indicative of the Executive's aim to plan on a longer-term and more strategic basis.
O'Toole for supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Minister, the CDL settlement for the budget that we're debating today increases, CDL meaning capital investment water, increases by just between 1 and 2%, I think, for water infrastructure. Last week in Dáil Éireann, your colleague Owen O'Brien moved a motion which agreed that, and I quote briefly, Mr Deputy Speaker, as a matter of urgency, the Government must set out its plan for the funding and delivery of increased capacity of critical infrastructure required for the delivery of housing, including drinking water and wastewater. When will you be setting out a plan for north of the border along those lines?
Sure.
I'm delighted that the colleague has taken more of an interest in southern politics. Now, I suspect that he's moving beyond his partisanist approach within the party. It's good to see it. If I had, I think it's a £12 billion surplus in my budget, I would expect you to be standing up in the chamber and calling on me to do exactly what my colleague done in Leinster House last week. I don't have a €12 billion surplus in my budget. As I said in my response, the Executive has now published its programme for government. It's voting on the Assembly's voting on the budget today. We hope to have the ISNI strategy published soon, and in the autumn I'll be bringing a 3-year budget to the Executive and a 4-year capital budget, which will be an opportunity for us to plan forward in relation to our infrastructure across the whole realm of areas.
Cathal Boylan.
Margaret, last one, could I ask the Minister how much funding did DFI get in 25-26? Sure.
DFI's resource budget outcome of €638.2 million for 25-26 is an increase of £78.7 million, a 14% increase from its opening 24-25 resource budget. This allocation should enable the Department to meet its highest priority measures and its essential services. The Department's 25-26 capital outcome is £917 million, representing some 37.5% of the total capital allocated to departments. This represents the important role infrastructure has in our society. The capital budget outcome will enable some key schemes to progress: the A5, the A1, and essential investment in water and wastewater treatment works.
Donnelly.
Speaker, can the Minister outline whether he has had a discussion with the Infrastructure Minister regarding a new funding model for Northern Ireland Water?
Minister.
I've had no discussions with the Infrastructure Minister in relation to a new funding model for NI Water, though I am conscious that the Infrastructure Minister has responded to a number of debates and questions in the Assembly in regards to this matter.
Shamma Holland.
Number 5, please.
Sure.
I have written to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury on EU replacement funding beyond 2025, both directly and jointly with my counterparts in Scotland and Wales. This issue has been central discussions point in my meetings with the Treasury. I have also written to and discussed this matter with other British Government ministers, including sending the agreed executive position paper on successor funding to the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner. The Shared Prosperity Fund, the successor to the European Social Fund and European Regional Development Fund, will be delivered by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government in 25-26. This is intended to be a transition year to provide time for a successor programme to be developed. It's unlikely we will have clarity on funding post-26 before the spending review in June. Clearly, the longer we are left without clarity, the more difficult it will be to deliver an effective spending programme. This is an unacceptable position. My officials are working closely and collaboratively with other executive departments and with the community and voluntary sector to gather evidence in order to inform the development of any potential successor funding. This will help us move as quickly as possible and effectively as possible once we have had clarity which we require from Whitehall.
Shamma Holland for supplementary.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for your answer. Can you give us an assessment of the impact on the community and voluntary sector from this arrangement, the transitional arrangement, and whether you've had any engagement with the community and voluntary sector to ascertain how they can overcome the barriers that they're facing with this transitional period?
Minister.
I met representatives of the community and voluntary sector a number of weeks ago on this very matter and discussed the challenges they face. It is far from ideal. I think we require clarity, and it almost seems now like a standard answer to every question, but I don't expect any clarity from any government department in Whitehall ahead of the June or the spending review. The Treasury has almost gone into lockdown in terms of its deliberations on what it's doing. Departments in Whitehall are waiting on decisions from the Treasury, and none of those decisions are going to be announced ahead of the 11th of June. So I would hope that clarity will be brought to this matter, along with a whole lot of other matters on the 11th of June, and then we'll be able to give certainty to the local community and voluntary sector on the way forward. The funding envelope, I hope, is satisfactory to carry out the important work the community and voluntary sector do here.
Declan Kearney.
Minister, the loss of European funding is probably one of the most extreme demonstrations
of the legacy of the Brexit arrangements which were imposed upon us. Therefore, what would you say to us are the requirements on this British Government to meaningfully engage with this issue with a view to ensuring that the funding pressures created are alleviated?
Mr.
I think it's imperative upon the British Government to properly engage in this matter. The Executive has given them a paper on what we believe should be the way forward, an agreed position around the Executive table. As I said, I've raised it with the Treasury, I've raised it directly with the Housing Minister, and I've also raised it with the Deputy Prime Minister as well, which reflects the importance I place in regards to this matter. I am somewhat disappointed in the lack of engagement back on this matter, and I would hope that the Government lives up to its commitment on its manifesto, that it is going to devolve these powers back to local devolved institutions such as our own. But I also hope that they properly fund the schemes moving forward, because as we've seen with the previous government, while they did put a scheme in place, it was significantly underfunded from what the European Union was providing.
Mr. McNulty.
Minister, what work has been done to identify charities from whom the Executive commissions services and who may be impacted by a loss of EU funding, and how might this jeopardise Commission services, and what steps are being taken to mitigate this?
Sure.
It would be up to each individual department to do an audit of what services they bring in from the community and voluntary sector and how it may be impacted by a loss of this funding. However, I do emphasise this. I'm not suggesting we are going to lose the funding, but at the moment we don't have clarity, and ahead of the spending review we don't have clarity. So the quicker clarity comes forward and funding comes forward, then departments and the community and voluntary sector will be able to sit down together and work out a programme for the remaining period.
Colmore Bradley.
Speaker, question 6.
Mr.
My department is currently assessing its entire accommodation requirements as part of the civil service estate. The implementation of the civil service hybrid working policy in 2021 has significantly changed how the civil service uses its estate and has provided opportunities to progress a leaner, greener and modern estate situated to the needs of the civil service in delivering today's public services. It's important we have a modern, fit-for-purpose and right-sized office estate that is a welcoming environment for people to work collaboratively. The first stage in the strategy aims to reduce our in-scope footprint by 40% by 2028 through consolidating the office estate and divesting of surplus properties. County Hall Coleraine was not included in the first stage plans. However, I have been advised that the building is under-occupied at present, and a review of the civil service accommodation needs in the area will be undertaken over the next 18 months. My officials are currently consulting with departments who occupy the building to collect information and better understanding of their accommodation needs. Following this, we will engage further with departments to consider how best to address the current and future requirements. Consultation with trade union representatives will of course be carried out as this work progresses.
Bradley for supplementary.
Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answer there. It's pretty clear and pretty concise. But the County Hall is a large building capable of housing 600 to 700 people. Currently there are under 200 people there. It stands on the edge of Coleraine Town Centre. It's a landmark building and it could be utilised in a better way. And I look forward to the Minister coming back to the House and giving us an answer on how it's going to be utilised going into the future.
Mr.
I don't wish to preempt the review which I mentioned in my original answer that's going to take place over the next 18 months. But once the review is complete, I will ensure the member receives confirmation of what the plans are.
Emma Sheeran.
Cloncorlia agus Wales leis an éire fine freigrisian. Minister, can you outline what your department has done to improve regional balance?
One of the maybe perhaps unintended consequences of the new policy in relation to allowing staff to work from home or from different locations has ensured that more regional balance has been facilitated as staff will be working closer to home or from home, and therefore in terms of investment or spending will take place closer to home than what previously had been the case. There are 6 Connect hubs, 6 Connect 2 hubs were opened in August 2022, allowing staff to work remotely at 6 regional locations: Ballykelly, Ballymena, Bangor, Craigavon, Downpatrick, Omagh, as an occasional alternative to working from home or in their designated office. We are continuing to work through our location of our buildings and where they're best placed, best use of, and as I've said to Mr Bradley, in terms of reviewing the current estate to make sure it's cleaner, greener and meets the needs of the workforce and delivery of public services for the modern era. And as part of that, I want to ensure that regional balance is taken into account as well.
Owen Tennyson.
Evan, Deputy Speaker.
Minister.
The independent report by the Ulster University Economic Policy Centre, published by my department on the 6th of May, provides an important evidence base to highlight the detrimental impact that decisions taken in Westminster are having on our businesses, community and voluntary sectors, as well as our public finances. The report sets out that there are many factors that make up the cost of doing business, including the cost of labour, energy, property and transport. However, one of the main areas for concern highlighted by employers across sectors has been the impact of the changes in employers' national insurance contributions, which came into effect in April. I have shared a copy of the report with the Chief Secretary of the Treasury and impressed on him when we met on the 24th of April the need for support or mitigation to be put in place to ease the strains of the impacts of the national insurance contribution changes. I also highlighted the disparity in VAT and the negative implications for business, especially for hospitality businesses operating near the border. I want to see a reduction in VAT to enable our hospitality sector to compete on a level playing field in the all-island economy. I have urged the Chief Secretary to take urgent action to address these issues in the June the June spending review.
Tennyson for supplementary.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for that answer. Minister, given that the sole action off the back of the cost of doing business report so far appears to have been to forward that to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, is there anything actually in that document that the Treasury wouldn't have already known?
Sir.
Well, I think it is an important piece of academic research to show to the Treasury that the differences in here in relation to other regions they have responsibility for, and highlights once again that when they're making decisions in Whitehall about this place, they either need to take into account what their decisions and implications are for this place, or they allow us to make those decisions. So I think that's first and foremost. And the suggest that's the only action, just as all they've done is posted off the Chief Secretary of the Treasury. The decisions were made in Whitehall. That's where the decisions were made. So the implications are required there. I've also shared it with my executive colleagues so they can understand in terms of any engagement, dealings or policy areas they have directly with businesses, the challenges that business face as well. And it's also worth noting that through our rates relief schemes, we're already offering business £250 million of rate relief annually. So the executive is playing its part in this regard.
Before I call the next supplementary question, I want to remind members that they must not walk between or stand between a member asking a question and a minister answering a question. That includes private conversations mid-question on the opposition front bench. Philip Brett for a supplementary.
Deputy Speaker, Minister, as I raised with you a few weeks ago when you were at committee, the report highlights the impact of the Windsor framework and the continual displacement of Northern Ireland within the UK internal market, and that's economic impact. Will the Minister ensure that the Executive makes a collective appeal to the UK Government to fully restore Northern Ireland's place within the internal UK market?
Minister.
Well, I think those who thought Brexit was a good idea 8 years ago, 9 years ago now, should have a long enough now time to reflect to suggest it wasn't such a good idea. And perhaps, and I haven't seen the detail of the agreement between the British Government and the EU this morning, but perhaps within that agreement there is a further easement of the barriers that were put in place by the decision of 8 years ago. I don't want to see barriers and borders for business. I want to see a free flow of business across these islands and beyond these islands and across this island. I think that's a good way of doing business. So let's see what the implications of this morning's deal between the British government and the EU are, and what our next move should be.
Nick Matheson.
Speaker, question 8, please.
Sure.
The deadline for departmental June monitoring returns is Thursday the 5th of June 2025, with executive consideration expected to mid to late June. The Barnett consequences confirmed in the Chancellor Spring statement, combined with confirmed Barnetts in respective employers' national insurance contributions, have resulted in 158.5 million resource DEL and 2.4 million capital DEL being available in June monitoring. The Executive agreed how this funding will be allocated as part of the budget, and they have been presented in the final budget 25-26 as indicative June monitoring allocations. This includes allocations to support programmes for government priorities, including childcare, waiting lists, special educational needs, making communities safer, and Loughnane. It also includes general allocations to help departments address the increase in employers' national insurance contributions.
Matheson, supplementary.
Thank the Minister for his answer. Is the Minister able to provide any more detail on how far the June monitoring allocations will be able to go to help alleviate those pressures you referenced in relation to employer national insurance contributions in the public sector?
The Executive took a decision to use the allocations, around £146 million, which came from Barnett consequences in relation to national insurance contributions, in a more strategic way than simply just salami slicing them up and handing them out to departments. For instance, the £50 million that has went to health to help to add up to the $215 million to tackle waiting lists and elective care centres could be attributable to that funding. Funding for Loughnane, funding for skills, etc., can be attributable to that. Departments then receive an allocation beyond that. How departments use that allocation is a matter for them, and departments are best placed to report back how they used it and how it helped alleviate against the national insurance contributions pressures. I'm not suggesting the funding available would help support departments in full, but the decisions are theirs.
Call Cathy Mason.
Minister, you outlined there in your previous answer about much needed funds for childcare. Can you outline how much funding will be allocated to childcare in the June monitoring?
Minister.
Between the June monitoring and the budget this year, we'll be increasing our childcare and early years strategy funding to £50 million, doubling it from last year, which I think is a significant strategic move and investment by the Executive going forward. We have also committed to ensuring that an additional £5 million goes on top of that as part of the June monitoring round, so a total of £55 million towards the early year strategy and childcare this Executive has placed this year.
Call Michelle McElveen.
The civil service is an equal opportunities employer and is committed to building a diverse and inclusive civil service that reflects the society we serve. Learning and development for the civil service is provided through various sources, including external groups identified as subject matter experts and corporate membership aligned to Section 75 groups. It is appropriate to adopt an approach that ensures learning and development resources for the civil service include subject matter expertise and or lived experience insight. Each public body has its own arrangements for training, provision to address the learning needs of their organisation.
McElveen for a quick supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and thank the Minister for his answer. The Civil Service and some other public bodies have been members of the Stonewall Diversity Champions programme since July 2018, run by the lobby group Stonewall, providing access to training and resources. And while the annual spend of £2,575 is small, the impact can be huge. Given Stonewall's stated position that a man who has transitioned as a woman has been rejected by the Supreme Court as wrong in law, will the Minister recognise the conflict that arises in this situation and ensure the civil service and other public bodies withdraws from this programme?
quickly as possible, please.
As I said in my question, it's vitally important that when we're providing training to our civil service colleagues, that we have people who have the lived experience providing that training as well. Stonewall and all other organisations will be treated in the same way in terms of bidding for funding, etc. But I will not be discriminating against any group. There's an inclusive service we run, an inclusive civil service, and that's the way it will remain.
Members, that ends the period for listed questions. We now move to 15 minutes of topical questions. Questions 4 and 7 have been withdrawn, and I call Matthew O'Toole.
Deputy Speaker, Minister, you labelled me partitionist earlier on. You're fully entitled to do that in the spirit of robust debate in this chamber. It's not me pursuing one policy on one side of the border and another one north of the border. You mentioned earlier on the 13 billion surplus the Irish Government has. That's correct. Wouldn't it be great if we were in one state able to spend that money? Until that date, what are you specifically doing to take more power as Finance Minister here so that the UK Government, the Treasury, cannot have this baleful power over how we spend money? Because you're very good at explaining the limitations to the Treasury. I'll get there, Mr Deputy Speaker. You're not so good at saying what specifically new fiscal powers you will take.
Minister.
Thank you. Well, I think I welcome the fact that you're moving on beyond partitionism. But that's what I meant to say if I didn't say it, so I welcome that. I welcome the fact that you're moving beyond partitionism. You and I have this repetitive conversation every time we meet in this chamber. I put on the record quite clearly, my focus at this time is getting this department, the Department of Finance, and this executive through the spending review. It is the most significant fiscal event for perhaps 5-10 years. Right? So I think it's only right and proper that I use my energies and time at this period to steer us through the spending review. When I get us through the spending review, I intend to look at fiscal devolution and what powers we should be devolving at each stage of that journey, because I do believe it will be a journey. It will not be the Big Bang Theory, it will be a journey. So let's get through the spending review, and then you and I'm sure, will have many debates, and among others in this chamber, around the next phase of the fiscal transition and maturing of this institution as well in relation to its taxpayers.
Supplementary.
Big Bang Theory is also a sitcom, and there's a lot of comedy happens in this chamber, but I'd like to see some serious business too. Can you confirm, so you keep saying this is all we're going to see mañana after the spending review. The most recent budget, the one we're debating today, offers a capital settlement of 335 million for wastewater. That is a 2%, barely 2% increase. Are we going to see a long-term plan to increase investment in wastewater this year?
Sure.
Well, it's a question best placed to the DFI Minister. I'm sure as all ministers will be bringing forward, and the members are aware, we're looking at 5-year sustainability plans as we move forward, and we have the 3-year spending plan, 4-year capital budget. So that's a question best placed to the DFI Minister. All ministers will have to look at their forward spending programme, because I want to see the 3-year budget as a transformational budget rather than simply dividing the budget by 3 and moving forward. So I want to see transformation at the centre and at the core of the 3-year budget. So that's my principles when I look at it. Questions about individual ministers' responsibility are best placed to them.
Ferguson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Minister, how will the increase in procurement control limits benefit those who do business with government? Thank you.
Sure.
The increase in procurement control limits is about simplifying the process. Ministers and colleagues and MLAs will be aware that many times this is raised as an issue which is increasing costs in the public sector, that there is too much red tape, too much bureaucracy in relation to how we procure materials and other goods for our arm's length bodies and our services, etc. So the recent changes that were introduced are about simplifying that, lowering the levels where more paperwork is required, and ensuring that people who work in the sector fully understand how they can save money by using the procurement exercises in the fashion which we have laid out.
Ferguson, supplementary.
Minister, as you mentioned, we often hear of schools and colleges, etc., and how long it can take them to have simple repairs done. Will these changes make things much easier?
Sure.
I believe they will if the opportunity is given to staff and colleagues to train and fully understand the services involved in front of them. And sometimes the difficulty is getting the time and the space even to do that. But the changes mean that procuring goods and services between 5,000 to 10,000 require evidence of a price check of two prices. The threshold where the tender must be advertised on e-tenders has increased from 30,000 to 50,000, which eases up things. So I think there is opportunities. I want to bring further changes to the procurement process forward. We also always have to be mindful that we're spending public funds, and we have to have the right practices and processes in place to protect those public funds. But I do think at times there's a danger that we gold gilt these things, which makes it very, very difficult to deliver public services.
Patrick Delargy.
Last Kencolia, and thanks to the Minister for his answers so far. Minister, what work is your department doing to better understand our productivity performance compared to other regions?
Sure.
NISRA is currently working alongside the Department for the Economy to explore the development of improved productivity statistics. NISRA are in the process of setting up a new team to develop a suite of productivity metrics to facilitate greater understanding of business productivity and to provide policymakers with more timely data than is currently available from ONS.
Supplementary.
Thank the Minister for his answer, and as we know, timely data is particularly relevant here. As the Minister knows as well as I do, productivity is a key pillar of Minister Archibald's economic strategy, and I want to ask, how does your work in your department interface with the work in the Department of Economy, and I suppose how can we encourage collaborative working on this issue?
Minister.
I think NISRA obviously is ideally placed to assist the Department of Economy in this role, and I think in relation to other departments as well, around the collection of data and the understanding of data in a timely basis, and ensuring then that our policies and procedures are targeted in a timely fashion to respond to those. While we have relied on ONS and others for this data, I think it's only right and proper that we, as has been happening at NISRA and the Department of Economy, are working together so we have a more timely response to this, which allows the Department of the Economy to have the facts and figures, but also allows the rest of the Executive to understand how we should respond.
Question 4 is withdrawn. I call Peter Martin.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker, and thank the Minister for his answers so far. Is he aware that Stonewall, which his department funds, has now been referred to the Charity Commission for actively encouraging organisations to disregard the implications of the recent Supreme Court ruling and the subsequent Equality and Human Rights Commission guidance?
Sure.
I wasn't aware of that, but the member will also appreciate being referred to a body is not the same as being found to have been wrongdoing by a body. So if there is to be a report, I look forward to reading the report.
Member from Peter Martin.
Thank the Minister for his answer. Can I ask him, does he remain content for both his department and the Northern Ireland Civil Service to continue to support Stonewall through public funding and wider policy terms, despite the mass exodus from this programme, including even the aforementioned Equality and Human Rights Commission?
Sure.
I am content at this stage that Stonewall remains part of the broader range of organisations that provide training and support to the civil service. I've answered this question numerous times in the Chamber, both verbally and in writing, and my position remains the same.
Danny Baker.
Minister, last week we had the Balmoral show, a fantastic showcase. How is the 25-26 budget supporting our farming community and the agricultural industry?
Minister.
I had the opportunity to visit the show last week, and it is a great spectacle and great entertainment, and the weather added to it. The 25-26 budget supports our agriculture, agri-environment and fisheries and rural development with a $332.5 million ring-fenced for this, recognising the importance of the sector to our economy and local farming communities. There's also a capital allocation of $12.3 million for the Just Transition Programme in line with our commitment to climate change. This budget sets out a direction of travel which shows the Executive is prepared to use our limited resources to do what matters most.
Baker for supplementary.
Cormac, Minister, and you mentioned you visited the Balmoral show last week. Would you agree it's a great opportunity for the government to interact with the public?
Sure.
It certainly is. One of the advantages of this place is that there is an opportunity for the public to have direct interaction with MLAs, ministers and others at the show. I spent a bit of time at the LPS stall, who were providing information to guests at the show in relation to how you can get help with your rates, particularly loan pension schemes and other schemes. And the feedback from that stall was fantastic in terms of the interaction they were having with the public and how they were able to be there and support members of the public who thought that they weren't entitled to support. But that chance to step up and talk to somebody from LPS proved to them that they were entitled to support, or a family member was entitled to support. So it was a great opportunity for the Executive and others to engage with the general public.
Claire Sugden.
Speaker, Minister, could you provide an update on your department's work in relation to divorce, including the introduction of no-fault divorce?
Minister.
I don't have all the details in front of me at this time, but we are planning to move forward with this policy and this legislation moving forward, but I will keep the member informed.
Claire Sugden, supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. I think it was your predecessor who anticipated this would require new legislation. Do we anticipate that this legislation will be in place before the end of the mandate?
Minister.
I would certainly hope that is the case.
Well, Cathy Mason.
Minister, last week, Minister for Education announced an extension of the childcare subsidy scheme that was going to cover school-aged children. How is the 25-26 budget supporting this?
Well, as commented on earlier, we're providing £55 million to childcare this year. It's a doubling. In fact, it's over a doubling of the support that was provided last year. And by doing so, it allowed the Education Minister to make his announcement last week. So currently we have an estimated number of children who would benefit from the discount will increase by 60% from the current 15,000 to approximately 24,000. That's a real, tangible change in people's lives and support for people as a result of the Executive's budget.
Mason, supplementary.
And thank the Minister for that answer. Minister, how has NISRA, which sits within your department, been helping to support the Department of Education with the gathering of data for the development of the early learning and childcare strategy?
Sure.
Yeah, again, it's another good example of how NISRA is assisting government departments beyond my own in terms of how and why we deliver public policy and what impact, both positive and negative, it may have in relation to citizens. So NISRA are engaged with the Department of Education conducting a childcare survey of households. It's the first of its kind here. This survey will play a critical role in improving the evidence base on childcare usage and costs. The childcare survey findings provide a valuable picture of childcare usage across the whole population, which has not been previously available.
Guy, for a very quick topical.
You're catching me here. Can I ask the Minister to provide an update on the 5-year financial sustainability plans the Department need to produce as part of the Executive's budget sustainability plan?
The budget sustainability team within the Department of Finance are currently engaging with other departments, working with them on the development of each department's sustainability plan.
Very quick supplementary.
Does the Minister envision these plans effectively complementing a multi-year budget that the Executive hopes to set from next year onwards?
They have to complement each other for them to be useful and to work. As I said earlier, I want to see the next multi-year budget as a transformational budget and used in a strategic way, not simply dividing a budget by 3 and moving on.
Members, that completes topical questions. Full list of topical questions. Thank you for that, and thank you, Minister. Please take your ease before we move to the next item on the order paper.